It was a father who told me about the Father, who was a good patriarch and passed on the wisdom of God that influenced my life in that one little 30-second moment in that old 58 Chevy. And because of that, I became a Christian and began to pursue godly things.
Our culture needs men, but not just males. What it needs is godly men who strive to emulate Jesus Christ. It is essential. It is time for Christian men to rise up and take their place as leaders in their calling as men. Welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where we explore where God is at work changing everything through Jesus, the incarnation of the truth. Today, we're going to go politically incorrect. We're going to discuss how truth changes men into faithful and strong followers of Jesus Christ. My guest for this discussion is Vince Miller. He's authored 31 books and has a men's ministry platform called Resolute. Vince has a powerful story showing how God works in and through trials and tribulations to accomplish his purposes. You're going to love his story, talking about how his grandfather helped him at a critical time of his life and brought him to faith. Vince is a dedicated follower of Jesus, and his ministry is hosted on major video and radio platforms, Right Now Media, Faith Life TV, Faith Radio. His latest book is called Essential Elements, Forging Godly Men, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's welcome Vince Miller to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Vince Miller, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast.
Awesome. Great to be here. Hope you are doing well today, too.
Yes, doing very well. And I know you're in Florida, which is much warmer than it is here in Colorado. And I'm looking forward to getting down there here in the next week. But I'm very fascinated by this topic. And what we're going to talk about, I'm just going to tell everybody right up front, is probably politically incorrect.
Good.
Because you have been told in the culture that marriage is an obsolete institution, that fatherhood is an obsolete institution, that the church is an obsolete institution, and that men and women are interchangeable. Mm-hmm. That's what we've been told. The traditional male leadership is automatically patriarchy, and patriarchy is bad. That's the messaging in the culture. And so today, Vince is going to join me, and we're going to kind of break this down a little bit. And you know from the intro a little bit about Vince and his focus on helping men be strong and helping raise godly young men. So anyway, that's a little bit of the background here, man. It's going to be fun.
Oh yeah, let's dive in, man.
Now you speak a lot to men's groups. You help them learn how to be leaders as men. I don't know if you get the pushback that we get when we talk about that kind of thing, but it's almost like you're being told you're evil if you're telling men to be leaders. That's exactly what we don't want, because when men become leaders, society goes sideways and things turn out bad. Does that ever come up?
Oh yeah, sure. Just go to my YouTube channel, see people push back on certain things and how they interact with certain messages. I've been confronted after, just speaking scripture at a men's conference. I've been attacked for various positions. And, I just think that we need some resilience today. I think, in navigating around your question a little bit, I think Christian men and women and spouses, marriages today, they need a little bit more grit in them. We need to understand that we can no longer sit back and be apathetic and passive about the things that we believe. Because if we sit around and do that too long, you see exactly what's happened in education, in the government, in our families, in our churches, because we haven't engaged. And that male pattern passivity, if you want to call it that, has led to all kind of ruin. I mean, just go back to the first verses of the Bible, or really the third chapter, and you see what male pattern apathy and passivity, indifference does. It allows sin to creep in. It voids the recognition of commandments. It fails to interact with the serpent that's persuading. Marriages fall apart. We suddenly realize we have knowledge that we probably shouldn't have had. Our days are numbered, and we live with a broken foundation in our life for the rest of our lives until we really do business with that. So yes, I discover that the more that I speak up about some of these issues and what I see happening in the world, of course I get pushback. I get pushback from pastors. There are people that don't invite me to speak any longer. There are people that refuse to listen. But I think that's really part of what we've got to decide in our minds today. If we're going to be at the tip of the spear of biblical change in the culture today, or if we're just going to continue to drift on behind it and allow culture to consume us, consume our families, consume our churches, our businesses, and just go along for a ride because culture does what culture does. I mean, this is kind of where I get some of my doctrine of manhood is I really believe that masculinity for the most part is a social construct. It is an ideology picked up from ideas and images that forms clusters of a cluster of worldview in our mind regarding what we think about manhood, marriage, life, God, etc. And we can choose to listen to the culture and what it says. And there are a lot of things that are downstream of culture today. Upstream from it are things like politics, it feels, or certain leans on politics. Is Hollywood. Hollywood is upstream of culture today. We know that. Media for a long time has been upstream of culture, and we're just downstream of it, taking it in. And we have to decide if we're just going to take in cultural constructs on masculinity, on marriage, on parenting, on life, on biblical Christianity, or if we're actually going to go back, very simple logic, go back to the one who created man. Not go to other men, but go back to the one who created mankind and seek out his intent and design in creating us. But that is not the way of our culture today. We have sought every ideology from man and woman today to pursue what we believe is a construct of masculinity or femininity, and both of them are just broken, and they're broken woke because we haven't gone back to a true biblical understanding of what manhood, womanhood is, of marriage, of any of those things. And so we're wondering today, I think, feeling lost and even shamed and maybe too silent about what we see happening in the world. And now our lives are adrift, our marriages are adrift, our kids are adrift, the culture is adrift, our churches are adrift. And now we're trying to grapple for what that is. And I think there are a few voices out there of truth, of biblical truth, that are trying to drive people back to it. But now they are a force to be reckoned with. They're shamed and blamed. They're put out because, well, we don't want to admit that there is a God in the universe and that he created us male and female, and we have to go back to him for the design for manhood, womanhood, and marriage.
Yeah. Well, you've really put your finger on it, because if masculinity and femininity,
I hate that word, don't you?
feminine, it's easy for you to say. If they are merely social constructs, and that's what I was taught in school, by the way. So all of the gender confusion that's out there now was happening when I was in school in the early 1990s. I was taught the idea of symbolic interactionism. That as a father, I don't have a purpose as a father. I'm just playing a role as a father that I think other people who I think might be watching me would think that I should do if I were thinking about them and they were thinking about me. And so there's no enduring masculinity or femininity that goes beyond that. And I'm working on, this is a book I'm working on right now, which is why I'm so interested in having this conversation with you. But my co-author and I are working, we've decided to specifically confront that idea that masculinity and femininity are roles that we play, and start talking about our purpose as male and female that we've been designed with. Because if it's a role that you play, it could go one way or the other, right? Masculinity could be being rough and tough and smoking cigars and shooting things, or it could be laying down and let women do whatever they want, and roll over you and just be passive so that women can establish a matriarchy instead of a patriarchy. Or you could go either way, and it would just entirely depend on what the vibe of the culture is at that moment.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love that. I think you're hitting a really good direction for this book. I would add to it, and maybe you want to add this as a thought to the book too. I think there are definitive roles. I mean, if you read throughout the entire Bible, you're going to see that men and women do play roles. We start off with basic gender roles, so male, female. Then one day maybe we become a husband, so there's a role. Father, grandfather, great grandfather. There's another role. Disciple in the New Testament is another role. And we have all these roles, but here's the one that I think clarifies all the other roles. And if we can see our identity through this role and its purpose and its meaning, all the others fit into place. So here it is. For me, a male, it's son. For females listening today, it's daughter.
Mm.
And here's why I say that is we fail to remember that there is a father of all mankind, Paul said. One father of all mankind. And we don't like that idea for some reason, especially culture doesn't like that idea, common culture. Biblical culture loves it, but then fails to really drive into it the intent, the purpose, and the meaning. Because if there is one father, then that makes us all sons. And if we see
That's
everything through sonship, then manhood isn't about me being the man. It's about Jesus being the man and him making me a man. Therefore, I'm a son in that relationship. Or let's just take father. If I perceive my role first as son, then I begin to look at the people in my home, the believers in my home, as brothers and sisters. That means my wife is my sister that I happen to sleep with, by the way, my sister. And then my daughter's also my sister, and my sons are my brothers. That means that I might play the role of a father, but my role is to be a brother and sister to them and point them to the father. And then that relieves me of trying to be the hero dad or the perfect dad, right? Because there is a perfect dad and I'm driving them to him. Or here's another one, a husband. I do play a role as a husband, but I have a role in that brother-sister relationship where I play my role as a brother in the marriage. And we understand that is to love and to cherish and to lead sacrificially, if you go over to Ephesians. And then my wife has a role to play too as a sister. She has her role to show respect and to love. And we both get to play these roles, but we see them through this identity as a son and a daughter of the King, of the Father. And then everything all of a sudden gets clear. It just gets extremely clear. And then we begin to see not only our identity through him, but our purpose through the Father as well. And then it takes us back to pre-fall, where God gave us the authority to reflect his image, to rule his creation, to reflect his character to the world. And then we then can see our identity through that, and we play that role better. We then receive the image, and we we lead with created love and sacrifice, and then we live with purpose, reflecting his character. Then everything really falls into place when we really go back to, hey, look, I'm a son and you're a daughter of the
Yeah.
King, of the Father. I don't know if
So
that
good.
informs you at all, but
Man, it absolutely does. And anybody who's watching or listening right now, this is how I learn. I ask people questions. I meet with people like Vance, and these are tough questions. But Vance, what you're saying right now is shaping my thinking. I think it's shaping the thinking of the people who are watching and listening, because we look at something like the transgender agenda and we get obsessed with the idea of what is a male and what is a female.
mm-hmm.
And what we should be asking from a biblical perspective is, what is a son and what is a daughter? You're actually shaping my thinking. I think when the book comes out, we're all going to realize this conversation was instrumental in helping to frame that out.
Yeah,
Man, so much. There's so many things I want to talk about, though, because how do you see the current agenda? And maybe that's not a good way to put it, but there is a kind of agenda that maybe comes out of a secular worldview. Maybe it comes out of kind of a proto-feminist worldview, where the best path toward freedom and safety for people is to collapse all gender distinctions.
That is a disturbing way to think about it, and let me just go back to Genesis 1:26 and 27 real quick. I believe that, it's simple logic again, but if you want to understand something created like my watch, you go back to the person who made the watch to understand the watch. And let me tell you, to understand how to use this watch, I need a manual to understand.
Yeah, that's right. I know. Right. I got that little manual with my.
But I think what's fascinating about manhood and womanhood, male and female, is if we go back to the beginning, I believe God imparts identity to us. And I think he imparts identity both physically and spiritually to us because he knew that question was too big for us. It is too big of a question. God wants us to play inside of his created domain. And, I'm kind of using a sandbox terminology here, but he wants us to play inside of that domain. But asking the identity question is a good question metaphysically, but to step so far back that we can't see obvious created order in even how we are designed is to me is kind of to miss the point of the design. And God created us and imparted identity to us because I think he knew psychologically that question is too big for us. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there is some people who struggle with real dysphoria out there.
Yes.
But we should tackle that in a caring way, but to open the question up in such a way that creates more confusion and makes it more ambiguous for people is disturbing to the soul. That is not what our soul wants. Our soul longs for answers. This is what I love about Jesus' parable of the prodigal sons. I love the story because, number one...
It's a good way to put it. I think most people miss that.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. I think Jesus tells the story of the prodigal sons because he wants us to know that there's a father who loves us, who's pursuing us, who will allow us to go live recklessly or allow us to live self-righteous lives. But he wants us all to come home to not only his love, but his design and intent and purpose for our lives, not to live self-centered or self-righteous lives, but to come home. And I think there's so many dimensions of that story that can actually get after some of the issues that I think that people are experiencing with gender dysphoria. Mm-hmm. some of the issues that we're dealing with in culture around blowing up the genders altogether and just
Mm.
starting from some sort of ambiguous form of some kind. I don't think
Yeah.
that's helpful. We need a place to start, and that's really what the Bible does for us at the very beginning in chapter 1. It's a
Right.
start, gives us a start so that we can understand. And then yet there's things that we still don't understand today, like the very first thing that God created, light. I mean, we still don't understand that today. After all the technology, you can go to some of the greatest classrooms in the world and they'll be confused about it. Is it waves? Is it particles? We don't really know. Like, blow it all up. Yeah, yeah, sure. There are things like that we can't quite understand or grasp. But the design of who we are, God has given us an innate desire to find Him and to find our identity in Him so that we understand how to live that out in this life. And I believe the Bible tells a story of it.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. It's how much everything really goes back to Genesis 1. What is God's created order? What did he do? And then Genesis chapter 2, putting them in the garden to work it and to keep it. I was speaking yesterday with our gap year students about economics and Marxism. And I began in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. You don't understand how our society functions if you don't understand Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. But I'd love to talk specifically about the masculinity, maybe say crisis of masculinity that you address when you travel and speak and work with people and make YouTube videos. You're seeing the impact in the fatherlessness. I think is a big part of what you talk about. Talk about that for a minute, because I was thinking, a book I picked up yesterday that I'm rereading that I haven't seen for probably 10 years is The War Against Boys by Christina Hoff Sommers, who was a feminist who saw that the entire education system and all of society was organized in such a way as to hurt boys so that they can't fulfill their design. Not like a big conspiracy, but you tell a boy you can't sit still in class, you don't get to go out for recess. Are you kidding me? Girls can benefit from recess, but boys need recess, right? And so to tell him the very problem that you're causing in this class, the very solution to it is the thing I'm going to withhold, is cruel. But that's kind of how things are organized. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I know you're talking to a lot of men who they're probably fairly battered by culture's expectations of them.
Yeah, I think fatherlessness is one of the biggest problems in our culture today and has led to all the other problems that we have. I mean, if you start to really trace it back, I don't know why we are so demeaning to men and we don't find a way to really lift them up and encourage them, even within the culture itself. And I understand there's some crimes that some men have committed that are unjust to society and the world and individuals. I get that. But I think a lot of it is because there's this broken connection between fathers and sons. And it all begins right there. This is where I think we fail to see the good side of the patriarchy, especially a biblical, loving patriarchy. So, I grew up in a fatherless home. I went through two dads before the age of 10. The first dad left when I was 2. Second dad came in when I was 5, left when I was 10. And, after that, I was a miss for direction. My mom essentially abdicated raising me. I moved in with my grandfather. I lived with him for 5 years between ages of 15 to 20, and then he died of cancer. And I can't tell you how good that was for me.
Living with your grandfather?
Living with my grandfather. Yeah, just seeing, every young man, and I'm speaking to young men right now, every young man has a desire, an innate desire to know and understand his heritage and his father. I was probably about 12 when I started really begging my mom to allow me to spend more time with my bio dad. And, he wasn't a great man. He's gone from this earth now. he lived a very hard life. He came back from Vietnam and addicted to drugs, and then kind of continued that lifestyle, and it just continued on to into perpetuity until he died. And you know, I don't know a lot about him, but I knew after my second dad had left that I had this innate desire to want to spend more time with my dad, and so I started really begging my mom to allow me to do that. And she pushed back against it because she knew who he was, and she was protecting me, but I didn't see it that way. So I kept begging and begging and begging. And finally, she said, fine, we'll talk to him. So I was only allowed to go over his house every other weekend, because of divorce proceedings, et cetera. So every other weekend I was at his house, and I wanted to change that up a little bit. I wanted him more involved in like my sports and my life and education. So I remember he was dropping me off at my mom's house after one of those every other weekend visits. And she's standing on the porch. She's smoking a cigarette. She waits for us to pull up. I get out of my dad's old O.J. Simpson Ford Bronco, I
Yep.
get out of his Bronco. Me and my mom kind of exchange a pass there. She tells me to go on in the house. She's going to talk to my dad. So I go in the house. I run around the backyard. I come around the back gate to where the garage was, and I'm facing the rear of the Bronco watching my mom and dad. And I did this because I had never seen them together in my entire life. In fact, this is the only time I ever saw them together. And she leans into the window, starts talking to him, small talk for a little bit. After a couple of minutes, it starts to blow up. Then I hear cursing, and then I hear the words, "No young man should ever hear," which are these words: "I don't want to spend time with him. You spend time with him." And then he drove off. And
Now,
to say
who
the
said
least,
that? Which your dad said that?
my dad
Yeah.
said that to my mom. Yeah, my dad said that
Wow.
to my mom. "I don't want to spend time with him. You spend time with him." And those are not words that any young man should ever hear. My mom and dad didn't realize that I heard that. But I did go back into the house. She told me it wasn't going to work. And I said, I don't want to go back over there ever again. And I didn't. And that moment really wounded me. But you can see in it, what I learned from it is that I was longing for a connection to my father. And then when my grandfather stepped in, even though he was older, it had a huge impact on that fatherlessness feeling. And then he just started pouring into me. He started discipling, teaching me simple things, showing me how to care for my human hygiene. I mean, he showed me how to do that, how to manners at a table, how to drive a truck, how to shave, how to treat women. And of course, he talked with me about God as well. And we had great conversations about God. One of them went like this. He had an old 58 Chevy pickup, which he gave to me when I turned 16.
Wow.
And he taught me how to drive on that truck, by the way, and all kinds of little details there. But I do remember when he was teaching me how to parallel park that truck, which was not easy, by the way. There's no like little push button thing, it just parks itself. Anyway, we're parked one time, and I had backed and navigated the truck into a spot. And every time he'd have me turn off the engine, so I had to start from a fresh, unstarted truck position. And he just said to me, "Son, I need you to hear something." He said, your mom and your dad say God is not real because Christians are hypocrites and the church is full of broken people. And then he pauses and he goes, "And I need you to know that they're right. The church is full of hypocrites, and the church is full of broken people, and Christians are hypocrites, but you need to know something. My faith is not in broken people in the church or in hypocrites, and it is in a man who wasn't a hypocrite, whose life was broken for you and me. In Jesus, you'll find every answer that you ever need in life, and it's in him I have my faith." And that it's funny. Yeah, listen to this. This is every question that you're asking right now, but it was a father who told me about the Father, who was a good patriarch and passed on the wisdom of God, that influenced my life in that one little 30-second moment in that old 58 Chevy. And because of that, I became a Christian and began to pursue godly things.
Mm.
And that, I think, is a long story to make the point, but the point is this: is that there can be a very healthy version of patriarchy that symbolizes and reflects the image of the Father. But it means this, that we as fathers and mothers, we need to step in, and we can't just let culture consume our kids. We can't be silent. We can't be indifferent. We can't be apathetic to what's happening in education, in our neighborhood, on sports teams, in government, in politics, in
Yes.
our business. We can't sit back and allow it to continue to happen. We have to be the voice of reason, the voice of truth, and we have to live it out first with our own family. We can't expect everybody else to do the job for us.
Man, this is amazing. It's so good. I'm really struck by the story of you with your grandfather, partly because next month, we're recording this in January 2025. I'm speaking at a conference called the Legacy Coalition, which is a meeting of thousands and thousands of grandparents who want to have that exact kind of influence on their grandchildren. And I think you've just given a model and an inspiration for how to do that. But I'm also thinking about the way you saw Jesus in your granddad. I mean, a friend of mine told me once, do you realize that if Jesus went everywhere the Gospels say that he went, it would have taken 13 months of just walking? And I told my friend he was a real nerd for figuring that out, which is true. But your granddad was walking with you.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, isn't it? I mean, it's Deuteronomy 6. It's love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and then teach as you walk, as you sit, as you lie down, as you get up. And I think it's so fascinating that God gave us those words, the famed Shema, the hear. And he wants us to hear and do that. And it requires a lot of energy. It never ends. Even for the grandparents listening today, man, my grandfather was only with me for 5 years, but it was a bunch of little tiny moments that influenced and redirected my entire life, that undid a very corrupt worldview, that allowed me to adapt a new worldview, that led me into the faith and into ministry. I mean, on his deathbed, when he is dying of cancer, it's a fantastic story, and I'll try not to tell too many details, but basically I was off at school and college. I rarely got back to the San Francisco Bay Area where he lived. And, I had this strange interaction with a woman on a trip, and she was an older woman. She was probably 50 years my senior. And she was just one of those really witty older ladies that a young man would really take to, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
She was a little abrasive, a little crass. And anyway, we were on this trip. It was a class with school, so it was a week-long trip to the Northeast United States studying early church. And she was the one of all the people on the trip that I really took to, because I was the youngest guy on this trip. And we got to the end of the trip, and I began to tell her stories about my grandfather. And she says, I want to pay for you to go home. Now, at the time, I didn't know it, but she was one of the wealthiest people at this school. She was a very wealthy donor to the school. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm going to pay for your ticket. And I go, I don't want you to pay for a ticket. She says, I'm going to pay for your ticket, Vince, and you're going to go. And she picked that ticket for me a year in advance. Well, no kidding. My grandfather got cancer. My grandmother called me 3 days before he dies. She said, son, you need to come home. And I said, you're not going to believe this. I have a ticket. 2 days later, I left, flew into San Francisco International, drove straight to the hospital. I got 1 hour with my grandfather. And that 1 hour with him, he, put his teeth in. You could tell he was eaten alive by cancer. He'd gotten it in his spine. And his eyes are all sunken in, his skin's all yellowed, he has no hair on his body. It looks like his skin is just kind of hanging from his bone,
Yeah.
And he sat up for an hour, put his teeth in, and had a conversation with me, and it was delightful. And then he lay down And for the next 8 hours, I listened to the ambient noise of him sucking air.
Hmm.
And you've been there, you understand these moments. It's just you're listening to that white noise of the gasp of air that get longer and longer and longer between, and you're just wondering, when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? Well, right there in that moment, I prayed a prayer out loud with God that for the rest of my life, I was going to commit my life to doing ministry, to doing for others what my grandfather had done for me, which is
Wow.
step in, disciple, be a patriarch, love, teach, walk, sit, lie down, and get up. And that's what I've done the last 29 years now. And it's been remarkable, brother. I mean, it has been absolutely remarkable. But that is the legacy that a patriarch leaves behind is one of just pouring in little moments that you don't know how they're going to blow up. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, I didn't know
Yeah.
that I was going to be doing the ministry that I was going to be doing today, and it's going to be as big
Mm.
as it is. Like, I didn't
Mm.
know that, but that is all because of my grandfather, how he has poured in to my life. So I would encourage
Mm.
people listening today, be the patriarch. Be the
Yeah.
patriarch.
Yeah. That's so counterintuitive from the culture's perspective, but it makes perfect sense. That's such a beautiful story. As we get ready to wrap up, I'd love for you, Vince, to just share a little bit about how you encourage men to reflect the man Jesus Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. I've written a number of books now. The latest one is one where it's called Forged Men, and it just kind of takes men through the story of the Bible. And I think some men, especially men listening today, fail to understand that the Bible is a story about man. So, beginning of the Bible, man is created very good, molded by the hands of God. Obviously, chapter 3, we blow it with our apathy and passivity, and so the foundation of our life is ruptured because of our disobedience and sin. And really, the rest of the narrative of the Old Testament, if you read it carefully, is a story about God searching for a man. Ezekiel 22:30, for I sought a man among them who would stand before me on behalf of the land, so that I might not destroy it, but I found none.
Mm.
And and yet, if you really read the Old Testament, it is awesome. It is the story about God's search for maybe one man, just one. And we have all these really hopeful stories, like, Noah. He builds an ark in the middle of the desert when it hasn't even rained today. Preposterous, but he does it. He's obedient to God.
Yeah.
He builds this ginormous ship. It's not a boat; it's a ship.
Mhm.
And then Abraham walks his son up to the top of the mountain because he's got faith in God. Hopeful moment. David slays Goliath. Moses frees the people suffering in Egypt from underneath the burden of the Pharaoh. You go on and on and on. Solomon, et cetera, builds a temple. There's just all these great stories, but we also know that every one of these men had a great moment and a devastating moment. Noah drinks too much and sleeps with the wrong ladies, by the way.
Mm.
Moses strikes a rock with a staff. David sleeps with a woman and then murders his husband. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Like, how that makes sense, I have no idea.
Yeah. Right.
I never think more than one is good. I don't understand why he's the wisest man who ever lived. But every one of these men were they had great moments and then great failures at the same time, and all of this is just part of God's story to point us to God's self provision. Because at the beginning of the New Testament, I think God gets a little irritated with us, and so He provides
Mm.
His own man,
Mm.
Jesus Christ, the man.
Mm.
And in him, we see everything that God hoped we would be, but we're not.
Mm.
And the greatest part of that entire story is not just the miracles he did, water to wine, healing a bleeding woman, giving sight to the blind, raising Lazarus from the dead. The greatest moment of that story is Jesus dying on the cross for the sin of all humanity, because he was the only perfect one that could do the job, dying as a sacrifice for our sins so that we, speaking to men today and also women, but we as men could be restored in right standing with the God of the universe, removing the sin that stood between us so that we could be the men that God designed us to be way back at the beginning. We can have that restored relationship with the God of the universe. And the truth is, men, if you're listening today, you can be the man that God wants you to be. But you
Yeah.
have to go to the man who makes all men men, and that man is Jesus Christ. Our rite of passage is Jesus Christ and nothing else. That's
Mhm.
it for men. So go to the man, become men, and become a son, and see yourself in that identity. That's my encouragement to men.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm hearing that as a man, and I know a lot of people listening to this, a lot of men, young men and older men, a lot of young men looking for a sense of direction. And so this is huge. And the book you mentioned is called Forged Men. And now, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've written a lot of books, but I would encourage people to take a look at some of those and check that out. This is an opportunity for the church, really, Vince, to stand up and say, I know that what we are about to say goes against the grain of the people who are in power, who want it to be otherwise. They want to eliminate all the influence of the church and of God and of righteousness. And we're just going to live godly lives in Christ Jesus. Yeah. I mean, some things are super complicated in culture, but not that. Yeah.
Yeah, you nailed it, man. It's really more simple than we make it to be. And I think sometimes the gospel message gets convoluted by all the things happening in culture. Culture has done a masterful job of confusing us because the enemy is the author of confusion. And if you feel confused today, then turn to God's word and turn to God and see your identity through him and return home to him, and he will make all things new.
Yeah. Love it. Vince, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
You bet. I'm blessed, and thanks for your listeners listening today. We love you guys and hope this blesses you and you'll share it with someone else.
Thank you to my guest, Vince Miller, for coming on the show. You can learn more about Vince's work at beresolute.org. If you're interested in forging godly young men and women, I highly encourage you to check out Summit's 12-day Biblical Worldview Conference and Camp for young adults. This year's excellent speakers include Elisa Childers, Christopher Yuan, J. Warner Wallace of Cold Case Christianity, Dr. Sean McDowell, Dr. Kathy Cook, and many more. During each 2-week session, we equip students to defend their faith, to own it, and to live it out as a biblical worldview, building community with other like-minded adults. So, to get more information about these transformative conferences for young adults 16 to 22, just visit summit.org/conferences. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.